Thank you all for connecting and creating that harmony. That was really beautiful. Thank you so much. I guess if anyone has any questions real quick before we finish.
Yeah. Questions about it?
Let's talk about foraging.
Yeah. You can chat with us after too if you have specific questions about entheogenic church / joining or starting and finding community. So if you want any of the links that we have, including what I'm about to talk about next, you can direct your phone over there. It has a link to the Atlanta Mushroom Group on our website. And I'll put this up again at the end of my chat. Let's see. Okay. Yes, thank you. Alrighty, so who here is interested in foraging and finding like mushrooms and plants and not killing yourself in the process? Who here has already foraged before? Maybe once, twice? Maybe for a few years or a year, maybe? Year or two. Okay, so kind of newer and like learning about it. Who here's eaten like chanterelles before? Okay. Great. It's okay if you haven't. They're just kind of like oyster mushrooms and that kind of thing. Okay. So, a little bit of the background I didn't share. I ended up getting my degrees at University of Georgia in social work and public health to kind of bring people into nature, help people connect with their well-being, and just really found that being in the woods, connecting with mushrooms and doing our empathy practice was the way that I wanted to bring my education to you all. And we do hikes as part of our synagogue and part of our church. And so I just had a hike yesterday. I've got another one coming up on Saturday. Saturday, after it hopefully rains an inch tomorrow. We'll find out. And let's see. Okay, so I've been foraging for 12 years in Atlanta. It all started when I was at North Springs High School, and we went outside as part of our environmental science class, and I realized I didn't know any tree, any bird, any mushroom. Like, I didn't know anything about Atlanta, and I lived here my whole life. And it really started me on my journey. I was also looking for sacred mushrooms. They were hard to come by. And it got me into the woods, got me looking for mushrooms and finding different things. Most people, if you ask them and they forage, if you're like, who's the mushroom expert? Like, no one's gonna really call themselves a mushroom expert. Mycologists maybe will call themselves mushroom experts, but they often don't forage a lot of the time. So I just tend to tell people I've eaten over 250 species of plants and mushrooms combined in Georgia, and I don't I like how Sam Thayer, who I'll go back, he says you don't learn foraging, you learn one mushroom and one plant at a time, essentially. And I'm still learning every day. So I have a few books which I'll get out at the end if you guys want to look. I have this field guide with me, which is an amazing book. But has anyone heard of Sam Thayer before? So Sam Thayer has 3 books that only go into 40 plants each, and sometimes it's 4 to 40 pages. So he'll talk you through like the history of the plant, the description of it, how to use it, anything that's confusing, and like really going deeply. So instead of just having like a guide to like identify plants that has 2 paragraphs, his books go really deeply into knowing the plant, where it grows, how to process it. This field guide that I have has 670 edible wild plants, including this little wild bergamot here, in the book to basically help you identify that, in a way that feels safe. So it's been interesting because I've read every book that he's had, and he changes his advice a little bit. But before consuming a wild mushroom or plant, and this is especially true with plants, find multiple specimens. So if you're learning about something and you think you've identified an oyster mushroom, then try and find more than one. Because, with even this plant here, like you'll see something in the picture and that's just one plant, right? We're humans, we look different. Some of us have curly hair, some have straight. So if you're just learning a mushroom or a plant, you might have just seen a baby. And now the adult one, looks different, right? We look different as we age. So it's generally a good idea once you think you found something that you want to eat, try and see how many times you can keep finding that plant or mushroom. Then the next thing is to determine the group or the family. And so in his book, he groups things based on how the plants look. I have another book that I brought with me that's called Botany in a Day, and they group by the families. For example, in terms of groups, this plant here is bee balm or bergamot, and it has a square stem, opposite leaves here, and it's aromatic. And there's no flowers on the ground of it, so there's no basal flowers. So that's how he would group it. In Botany in a Day, they'd look at these flowers and they'd say, those look like mint flowers, and it has a square stem, so this is the mint family. So in terms of mushrooms and plants, it's kind of like when you're in school and you learn a term, they want you to know which terms those connect with, right? It's not just the term by itself. So if you learn a plant or you learn a mushroom, you want to know what other mushrooms they connect with. I like to tell people, some families are pretty chill, right? Like no one's gonna kill you. But some families, like there's that uncle you want to watch out for, right? And the other families are like, I don't even want to take my chances. Be like, no, there's some good people in there, and that's how it is with mushrooms. Like with mushrooms, I'll talk about amanita mushrooms, which there's some deadly ones in there, but there's some delicious ones. You gotta get to know the family though before you go deeper there. And with plants, there's the carrot and parsley family, which has some of the deadliest plants in Georgia, and it also has carrots. So, and fennel and cilantro, and so sometimes you want to get to know the family because there's some really tasty people, plants in that family. You might not want to ignore them. And so then he says, make a tentative ID. So, does anyone use an app to identify things? So there's some good apps out there, like iNaturalist is what I like, where you can buy an app and take some photos, and when it says well, at least for iNaturalist, it says we're pretty sure, or we're not really sure, or we're very sure. So it does give you a degree of certainty, but still whatever it gives you, that's still a tentative ID. If you're not at the point, once that app said this is what you have to then eat it. I would never just rely on that. The apps can definitely be wrong, especially if you don't take a photo for mushrooms. If you just take a photo of the top of the mushroom, it could be completely wrong. Generally getting the top and the bottom and the stipe together is important, and I'll show you pictures of how to do that. And then plants, generally if you take a picture of the flower, that's going to be really close because a lot of the families are based on flowers. If you just take a picture of a leaf, it could be all over the place. And so once you get to that tentative ID, you make a detailed comparison. So in this field guide and in any field guide you have, it will all have words for this it'll say, small petioles and opposite arrangement, square stem. And you want to learn what those words mean so that you can check off the boxes, because sometimes the pictures won't always look exactly like what you have, but when you read the description, everything checks out. And then the last one is to assess your confidence. And so I like in his field guide, he'll actually put a number next to it. So if it's a 1, that means you're unlikely to confuse this with a plant that's going to harm you. And if it's a 3 exclamation point, it's really watch out, because a deadly plant looks like this. And so I wish there were more books like his. It just came out. It may sell out soon, but I'll have it for after. So, how to get an accurate ID. This person, Farhat, made this image, so credit to them. But I'm going to be talking about Atlanta mushrooming. Has anyone heard of that group before on Facebook? Okay. So there's a group on Facebook. There's Georgia mushrooming. I decided that I wanted to start Atlanta mushrooming mostly because if I post a photo of a mushroom right now, you know you can go outside in Atlanta and see it. But our friends who's talking later, like Savannah, he's going out, he's getting like pounds of chanterelles, like black trumpets, like all these mushrooms, and they were getting like doused with rain. So they're getting it, and if you don't know exactly where it is, you know, that could be like 3 weeks before you need it. So we're getting really good info by seeing what people are posting and what's growing. So generally, if you're going to take some photos and you want somebody online to help you identify your mushroom or plant, take a picture of the mushroom undisturbed in the habitat. So, let's see, let's go. So, this one right here is growing on a tree stump, and I'm guessing it's a pretty old tree stump too. So, some mushrooms grow on the ground, some grow on tree stumps. This mushroom here grows on the ground. There's one mushroom that looks like this, that was in my PowerPoint later, that grows on a tree stump, and people from China think that they have something like that growing on a tree, but they get it off the ground. And a lot of deaths have come from just not noticing that that's a completely different mushroom, because the mushroom that they're used to eating is cultivated on straw, and now people are cultivating that on the ground. So you really want to know what the substrate is and what it's growing on. This one here is actually a deadly Galerina mushroom. It's the bottom of it. And by deadly, I mean you have to probably eat 20 of them. So apparently it takes 10 to kill a child, and it's interesting, right? Because ideally, you know, if you've never eaten a mushroom, it doesn't taste really good, you're not going to eat too many of those, and there's not tons of poisons. But this one, like 1 or 2 could kill somebody. And so, anyways, you want to see the top and the bottom. So the chanterelles here, you can see the ridges, whereas these have true gills. These are boletes mushrooms, which I've got a picture of later here, but if you want to get that one identified, there's a lot of things you want to look for, like whether it's changing color when you put your finger on it or not, and when you cut it in half, if it's turning blue, and how long that takes. And then also you want to sometimes cut mushrooms in half, because this mushroom here, when it's a little egg, looks very similar to something like that. And until you cut it in half, you won't know what you have in some cases. So anyways, you want to put the location, the country, the state, what it's growing on, and maybe even the trees if you know what's growing on around you. So, how many people broke the law of foraging? Almost everyone, probably. And that's because our foraging laws have gone wild. And if you Google foraging laws gone wild, you can see a law article from Fordham University that breaks down why in a lot of places it's not legal to forage. It used to be fine. Native Americans foraged for a long time, including the Ute tribe, which actually, when we go to Colorado in Steamboat, they would come up from New Mexico and go get the service berries on the tops of the mountains and follow the animals. And a lot of tribes and people relied on foraging, and it was pretty common to just, you know, forage for your food. But then it started with Native Americans. It was very convenient to say, because you're a forager and you're not like agriculturalist, you don't really need land, right? You can just kind of go somewhere else. And they defended their property with arms. And so essentially, this kind of started the looking down on foraging. And then with African Americans during the Civil War, when there was the thought that slavery might not continue, a lot of slaves knew how to forage. And the farmers knew that if they were allowed to forage, they could become free and probably make some money on the way up north. And so they were able to sell, basically slaves did forage on the land of landowners, and that was not normally a problem. They could even sell what they found sometimes. Still wasn't a problem. But once slavery was kind of ended, people in the South rethought their laws. And so, basically, in service of this goal, they zeroed in on practices that would allow freed slaves to be truly free by restricting access to foraging through the enactment of criminal trespass laws. So it used to be that you could go onto someone's property, and you can still do this in Scotland and England. You can go onto someone's property as long as you don't harm it, and as long as you don't take somebody's like food that they actually planted. you're able to go through properties and forage things that aren't of themselves so. So we're generally unimproved lands. So if someone has an orchard, you can't just go in and forage it, but if there was a mushroom that came up, there was really no problem with that until the 1860s in the US. And so they decided to make it illegal, and that applies because our state parks of Georgia, it's completely illegal to forage. Unless you work there, then you can apparently forage. And they do. And almost every place where it's not legal, there's somebody who works there that's doing it anyways. But I'm not encouraging that, I'm just saying that these laws are a little off. Let's see, so then even with rural Americans too in New York, they didn't want the poor white or like rural people messing with the Adirondacks, so they also made it illegal to forage like ginseng and other plants, and so there was this conservation movement. So really, I guess that's to say that if you go to Chattahoochee National Parks, anything on the Chattahoochee basically, there's a superintendent for each park that makes a new law every year related to foraging. Impossible to keep them all together, but we have a lot of power because there's literally just one person who decides what the law is. And recently there was a park where you can take a pound of berries or nuts every day per person, but you can't take mushrooms or plants. And my hope is that we can educate people that a mushroom is the fruit. Moving it around, removing the spores, and it should be thought of similar to berries and nuts. And really, if we all believe that and we just contact this one person, I think we could potentially change that. I guess on Kennesaw Mountain, you can have up to 3 pounds of berries or fruits a day. And you go down the road and then like not be able to forage at all. So city parks tend to be pretty good for foraging in Atlanta, and then other parks say don't touch anything. So basically, it's kind of a hodgepodge of laws, and every single park has a different law. You're likely breaking the law, but so are the kids that are climbing trees in my neighborhood. You know, so it's like we need to advocate for more sensible policies, and I think the Honorable Harvest is a good place to start. So, has anyone heard of the book Braiding Sweetgrass? Okay. It's a really great book, highly recommended, especially if you're getting into foraging and want to. It talks about spirituality, but so the Honorable Harvest, I kind of want to point out the difference between mushrooms and plants. When you're harvesting a plant, it's kind of more apparent that you are potentially harming it, and with mushrooms, you're potentially helping it. So take that into consideration. But the Honorable Harvest says, know the ways of the ones who take care of you so that you may take care of them. So I like how we're talking about how to grow mushrooms. You know, people can grow them and support them. Introduce yourself. Be accountable as the one who comes asking for life. So this is something that was applied for hunting, killing animals, or even like taking a tree to weave a basket, like an ash tree. So a lot of the time this was for, I believe, this was for when you were actually taking a life, which is not what's happening with mushrooms. But you ask for permission before taking, and you abide by the answers. So with trees, they'd even come up to the tree and they'd say, oh wait, this tree's covered in poison ivy vine, probably not going to take that one. And then they'd even put a blade into the tree and see if the tree was like wanting to be taken or not. And they would do this for every plant or animal that would be killed. So if you imagine going on a lawnmower and just like leveling thousands of plants, imagine having to ask each plant, like, do you want to be taken? It would take a long time. Never take the first and never take the last. So this one's interesting as well because with a plant, some plants, right, if you take that plant, that could be the only plant there, it didn't go to seed, you've just removed it. With the mushroom, it's underground or in the tree, and by taking that mushroom, it's possible that you're spreading those spores, as long as you can keep it in a basket and keep it outside, further than it would have spread if it wasn't taken. But I say that because sometimes when you're foraging, there's really only one mushroom. Like if you're looking for chicken in the woods, it's kind of hard to see 2 chicken in the woods at the same time and not take the first one. And so I will say in terms of mushrooms, it's interesting. when I found a chicken of the woods in a shady area that has a lot of water, I've harvested half and come back and it still keeps growing. But if you do the same chicken of the woods in a sunny area, you harvest half and everything just stops because it's too dry in the conditions. So I've seen the big bracket fungi like hen of the woods mushrooms. You can also harvest them. If anyone here has seen a half-harvested hen, and there's someone in Atlanta where we just keep going back and forth and we like keep doing half and then the other person comes. I don't know them. I'm excited to meet y'all if you're here. But anyways, other mushrooms like a chanterelle, you're not going to take a half a chanterelle and cut that, and then that's not going to produce another mushroom out of it. So it's important to know each mushroom. Some bracket fungi can live 5-10 years. Some of the conch mushrooms, like that tinder conch mushroom or some ganodermas. So generally mushrooms are short-lived, but if you're going to be harvesting roots and like parts of a tree, especially this would apply. Take only what you need and take only what is given. Never take more than half and leave some for others. So I've seen the never take more than half thing applied in a way that I didn't agree with. Like, it's hard to know how much people take, but again, if you got one chanterelle, you're going to cut that in half. What's the point of that, in my opinion? But if there's like 500 chanterelles, hey, you don't need to take all 500. And so in that aspect, I think, essentially, giving them to friends, but at the same time leaving them for foragers that are coming in. There are some studies with chanterelles that show that whether you picked it or cut it, it didn't matter. They came back for 25 years. They keep coming back. And really, the main thing of why mushrooms may be less common is not because of foragers. Like they're saying in the UK, I don't know if you know, but lion's mane is like kind of endangered there. It's because they're cut down on the forest, not because people are picking them. And so if you had old growth trees that had the mushrooms on them, it wouldn't be an issue. And you can also actively grow those mushrooms too. But so anyways, knowing what's going on in the area you're at, how common some are. There are some mushrooms that are pretty rare that I don't tend to pick. They're also not very tasty. So I do recommend learning it, but there's this kind of concept of like pick shaming. Like some people pick a lot of mushroom and someone's like, oh, you shouldn't have picked that. And there's some people on Facebook who are like, don't pick shame, and are really adamant, like in Florida. It's like the Florida mushrooming, like don't get mad at anyone for picking mushrooms. And then there are other people who are like, hey, like don't pick the mushrooms if you're not gonna eat them. And this one group was studying a specific bolete mushroom that was pretty bitter and probably not very tasty anyways, and it wasn't there and they didn't get to study it. And so I can understand both sides. It's interesting too in terms of like helping the mushroom. Like if the mushroom eats 100-year-old oak trees, I don't necessarily want to take that mushroom and put on another oak tree. So I think mushrooms are slightly different, and I'm not sure how Native Americans work with mushrooms. There's not as much literature about that. But then it comes back to harvesting in a way that minimizes harm. A lot of different ways to harvest mushrooms, but again, this is mostly for plants. Use the harvest respectfully and never waste. Share, give thanks for what you've been given. Give a gift and reciprocity for what you've taken. A lot of Native Americans will use tobacco, or they'll give water. So you can water the mushroom pile. You can bring some gifts for the area. And the goal is to sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever. And so they've actually done research on sweetgrass and different plants that natives pick, and they actually grow better when they are picked. And so a lot of the plants that have co-evolved with people that have been using plants do better when picked. So there are some rules in parks like don't pick a plant, don't molest a plant. Like, that's what it says. But you could actually be helping a plant, and some of them do want to be picked. All right. So Atlanta mushrooming. Okay. So the few different mushrooms that I kind of want to share that you might be seeing in the forest / how to get an identification, even if you're not going on a private hike or something like that. It was on my phone because I just had to do it last night. So this person, Todd Mitchell, he ended up running into me while I was doing a tour and said hi. He's on there a lot. So this one is an amanita mushroom. And I do have another picture of a different type of amanita mushroom. So the Amanita family looks like your typical mushroom in terms of there's a sac right here, there's a big stipe, there's usually a ring, this one might be stuck up there, and then that big top right there. And so this person says, consider posting it to Amanita International, and so they're talking about which section. So then, basically, Amanitas can be complicated. I even found one in Atlanta that I posted to an Amanita group, and they told me it's a rare mushroom. They haven't even identified the specific species. There's like 3 different names, and like to dehydrate and save it for like scientists to research it. And the reason is they're just super diverse. They're really hard to grow. Like Amanita mushrooms do tend to like pines, but the whole thing he was talking about with putting it on auger, like you can't grow an Amanita muscaria mushroom at all. It just won't grow. So there is a group, if you're interested in Amanita muscaria, there's 63,000 people ready to like tell you how to process that single mushroom. And here too, 23,000. So they're literally talking about this mushroom is legal. It grows around Christmas and inspired Christmas time. If you see Clay, he may have some that he's selling. That's our local version is Amanita persicina, the peach-colored flag here. But 23,000 people. And this one here, Amanita International, like they'll answer your questions with exactly what it is or how close they can get. So it's kind of the benefit of crowdsourcing. So a little bit of a forecast. I kind of had the vision, like just like how you have the weather forecast, it'd be fun if we had like an Atlanta mushroom forecast. So I'm predicting after the rains, and still there are some, the smooth chanterelles. This is just the picture I had. There's actually 8 different species of chanterelle, at least in the book. There's definitely more than that. Since I've been foraging, they've actually split off some chanterelles into like ghost chanterelles. I don't know. Someone was like commenting, yeah, you're in the group, Brandon, but someone was like identifying their mushroom as ghost chanterelle. I'm like, I've never heard of this. And like, it's like in 2021 when they coined that. I'm like, you know, anyways. And so with chanterelles, this family, I showed you a picture earlier with some ridges, but this one is smooth. There's no little ridges. It's kind of hard to see here. But chanterelles as a family are very safe. There's not a toxic chanterelle. There's black looking chanterelles, there's peach color, there's some whiter color, there's yellow, they've got ridges, there's some red ones. They're all edible and very easy for beginners. When you peel it, it's white in the center, and it smells like apricot. So this is one that's going to be popping up all over. If you took a picture of the bottom of the mushroom like this and posted it, maybe you cut it in half, someone could identify that's a chanterelle, and they'd help you eat that one safely. This mushroom here is Amanita sexaria. Some people might call it Amanita jacksoni. Has anyone seen any of these before? Everyone's seen like some of that, right? So we went from chanterelles, which are very easy for beginners to eat, into Amanita mushrooms, which I said, you know, there's some crazy family members if I were to kill you. There's some that are really cool and like make a good meal. This one is delicious, but I just want to kind of share how I feel safe eating this mushroom. And again, we generally tell beginners not to eat Amanitas, but the way that I know this one is edible and safe. Do y'all see these lines here? So these are actually the gills that you can see underneath the cap. And this is called striated margins. The striations, right? So the deadly Amanita mushrooms are not like potentially deadly toxic, and it's in Japan and it turns black on the bottom. But before that, most people are like, oh, brucellosis are very safe. Some of them can be extremely spicy. And some people from Eastern Europe also say that they'll eat any one of them if they brine them in salt and pour the water off and then prepare it and cook it. But most Americans often avoid the most spicy ones of these or the acrid tasting. So there's a lot of lively debate on Facebook of like, people like, my grandparents eat that. And they're like, I wouldn't eat that. And then, you know, so I will say that some of them are really good, some of them are really nutty. A lot of them are, these ones you can taste, but they can be very spicy, or they can be savory. And related to russulas. One of the white russulas turns into a lobster mushroom when it's parasitized by hypomyces. And so the Russula brevites is a white russula that grows in pine forests. So I used to really be down on pine because the chanterelles don't grow in the pine forests, and a lot of the mushrooms I was looking for didn't. But these ones are in the pine, and you sometimes see like a pile like just lifted up and a little bit of orange. Like dig that pile out, and sometimes you can find this mushroom that when you cut it, you can actually see the mushroom underneath, and it looks like a geode. Like it's like a really cool mushroom. It does have a fishy taste to it. It's called lobster because it's just really orange. Those are some that I've found in North Georgia, and also Sandy Springs. This one a friend brought to me. This is why I love having friends text me to ask what the mushrooms are, because I'm like, yeah, go get them. And so these are two types of sporasses. This is, I believe, the Americana and the Spathulata. There's Sporassus crispa, which is from Europe, and so a lot of books just kind of say the European name, and then they do research and they find actually it's a different species, and maybe there are different properties. And anyways, this one, they both have a very strong umami, savory flavor. I actually, I'll pull my bag out real quick. Let's see. I just want to show people, you know, when you go to Whole Foods and you get a mushroom, it's usually kind of clean. But you know, when you find a big mushroom, there's a lot of life in it. We've got, if you want to pass that around, you can give it a smell too. There's spider webs and centipedes and, oh man, I don't know if they were cockroaches, okay, I'll say that, but there's something else. And especially as the mushrooms get bigger and bigger, like the amount of animals that want to hang out in there is bigger and bigger. And so, you know, it depends. When you pick up a big mushroom, it could be right in an ant colony. Watch out. Or you could just have like 10, 15 different spiders and animals. So, you know, I hand out the clean pieces to everybody, but I'm just saying, if you get into this, you will see bugs. And, you know, that's something to just expect. I like how it says, so it's found east of the Great Plains under pine trees, happening right now. A friend found this last week. Looks like a large clump of tightly packed egg noodles. Some people say it's good like eggs. I think it's like a good calamari substitute. It has like that kind of texture. Whittier or jelly mushrooms, y'all have definitely seen these around, right? So there's nothing that looks like this that is toxic. There's no gills on the bottom, it's smooth. This one has some hairs. They used to call it Jew's ear because the ear of Judah was what it was really called, and it grew on a tree that they killed Judah on, whatever. Now we just call them jelly mushrooms. There's 3 different species that we know of that you need a microscope to tell the difference of, but there's no toxic mushrooms that are jelly-like without the gills in Georgia. And so, if you've had a hot and sour soup before, hot and sour soup is that mushroom and this flower, this Dave flower. So this is like kind of the hot and sour part, and the mushroom is there. This is the edible flower. So anyways, it's also, they call it black fungus, and you can get them at Chinese and like stores like that. And if you struggle with like gas from mushrooms, some mushrooms can cause that. These ones do not. So they're really good for people who are like, mushrooms, too much for me. You can buy black fungus already dehydrated. So I just find big mushrooms, sometimes the size of my hand or my head. I'll just leave them on the table and turn them over a bit, and they dehydrate on their own. And then you can throw them into soup or rehydrate them into something tasty, cook them. So there's a lot of good recipes online. Now boletes, this was what I was telling you about the fact that they discolor. This one's Lanmoa pallidorosa, which is the beef bouillon bolete, and it smells like beef bouillon. Or another friend said it smelled like sweat, but I don't know. It's kind of joking or crazy. I don't know. But so I kind of started the outline on this. So what makes the bolete is that you see there's no gills. These are actually little tiny circular pores. But these ones, the pores are tiny. So there is a group here that it's called the bolete filter. So has anyone heard of the dichotomous key before? Okay, you probably have. You're probably sleeping in biology or whatever. But basically, if you're trying to identify a mushroom and you have a dichotomous key, you theoretically have every single mushroom in the state. And the first question will be like, does it have gills? No. Okay, go to 5. Does it have pores? Yes. Okay, go to 6. And you can keep going to that until you get to the exact mushroom or plant you have. So that's how botanists and mycologists go into the woods and like start checking off every little tiny thing. Instead of that, you can go on this website and you can just answer the questions, which is the same thing. Where is it growing? When I clicked south, it took it from 330 mushrooms down to 210. Then when I clicked that the cat is red, pink, or purple, it took it down to like 120. And then the pores primarily yellow to gold, took it down to 93. If I then wrote it turns blue, it'd take it down to 20. And if I notice the taste and the flavor, and it would then get you close to what you have. Boletes are very safe because there's only one mushroom we know can kill somebody, and it smells terrible. It grows in Europe, and they call it the Satan's bolete because the bottom is red. So some people won't eat boletes that have a red bottom here. There is a bolete that has a red bottom that's really tasty and is lemony that I have eaten, but generally people in Eastern Europe that I've had on my tours say they will eat almost anything that's not red, and they scrape the pores off and they cook it like a potato. Like they'll boil it, pour the water off, and cook it in a pan with oil. This one I've dehydrated and it smells exactly like bouillon and like has a very strong savory flavor. So really, really tasty. This website will tell you if it's like delicious, good, terrible, iffy, yeah. So it's called Bolete Filter, B-O-L-E-T-E filter. It's like, I think the Mushroom Club of Pennsylvania or something like that. But if you look at Bolete Filter, the website's kind of crappy. And I don't know how well it works on the phone either. But just click off those buttons. And you can post. There's also a Facebook group for boletes. But this one is another safe mushroom that you can put in your mouth. I would do this with a guide or come on one of my tours and try it. But you can put it in your mouth, and if it's bitter, you're probably not going to want to eat it. If it's like tastes like you just put a spoonful of butter in your mouth and it's super savory, probably pretty tasty. And so these types of mushrooms, because there's not one that's going to kill you, and because there's many different types, it doesn't always matter if you know exactly which one you have, if you know it's a bolete, or if you know it's a rusula. And so that's not something I'd recommend for first-time foragers to just like start eating things you don't know what they are. But especially with mushrooms and sometimes with plants, is they update the genetics. Like I've eaten a honey mushroom that's changed its Latin name 4 times since I started foraging. So they do change names, but this is the importance of knowing families. Like if I know I've got a mint plant here, it's pretty spicy, pretty strong, smells like thyme, probably not going to kill me, right? But if I have like a parsley or you have like a carrot, I'd want to know exactly what I had, or like an amanita, exactly what I had, within reason. So there are nuances. Here's another one that's popping up, reishi or Ganoderma. Anyone heard of reishi mushrooms before? So this was a picture I took at Piedmont Park. Won't tell you where, but it's there. Another picture. See, these are both grown on roots, and this one's right by a tree stump. So they've been coming out for 2 or 3 weeks. One thing that we call these Ganoderma curtisii, the only reason you don't really need to know the species. What you need to see is that it starts orange, then yellow, and the actively growing part is white. Sometimes they're really, like this white part, some people cook and eat them. It's pretty bitter, but some people say very medicinal. The tea is also, you use like a gram of this and make a tea, and it's very bitter. And sometimes you can mix it with stuff, but it's like a medicine, good for heart problems, people say, for cancer. It has a lot of different uses. They will say that reishi, some people will say reishi only applies to the mushrooms that grow in China, And that's because a lot of the research has been done on the Chinese species. And so we have 3 different species that grow in Georgia, and there's just not a lot of research done. So some will say you can't generalize. I personally don't try to treat diseases with mushrooms. I try to prevent them with a healthy diet and mushrooms. So I'm not trying to like, here for your cancer, like have this much. You can use it for cancer, and I mean, it wouldn't hurt to do it. You could also put it in like beans or something you're cooking like a broth and then filter it out. But it can be really strong. So if you do actually get real reishi, I often, as soon as I take it, I cut it, dehydrate it, and then I use like a little piece because it can be very bitter. Don't mess up your whole soup. Like, yeah, and you can grow them pretty easily too. So this was interesting, just kind of back to the religious use of mushrooms in Taoism and in China. They say they've been using reishi. Some people say for 2,000 years. Other people say only for 500. And they'll point to this photo. It kind of looks like a reishi with like the different, like I showed you, red and white and yada yada. These are pretty cool paintings of their mushrooms and their mortality. But actually, it's more likely, they said that when they took this mushroom and they had it potent enough, they could see God. And reishi mushrooms, to my knowledge, are not hallucinogenic. If anyone wants to try, it's pretty bitter. I don't know. But there is a mushroom that looks very similar, and you'll probably see these. These are Gymnopilus luteifolius. You've probably seen them actually in Atlanta. And they do contain psychedelic, like psilocybin. And it's most likely that the Gymnopilus in China was what they were using to see God. And so I used to be really against them, like when the trees fall down, they would mulch them up and then like ship off the mulch. And if we keep the trees, like I had a chicken of the woods tree that they mulched up, that would have been 30, 40 years of chicken of the woods. Now it's mulch. And so that was pretty depressing, it was pretty sad. They mulched up a bunch of mulberry trees, and I was like, what the hell? Like literally just cut a 35-year-old mulberry tree down because it was making fruit and putting it on the playground or whatever, I don't know. But then in that mulch, I saw 2 pounds of Gymnopilus, and they call them laughing gyms. I will say that each pile is different. The potency of each pile is different. Some people have taken 30 grams dried and not felt anything. And then on this pile, 8.5 grams dried is like taking an eighth of pubescence, like very, very strong experience. So Paul Stamets will also, there's a video, and he'll say, don't eat these mushrooms, because deadly Galerina can grow next to it. It's only true in the Pacific Northwest. And here, deadly Galerina mushrooms don't grow in the summer at all. You only see them in January and February. And so it's very interesting, the fact that the seasons are different. Some advice someone's giving you up in the Pacific Northwest doesn't have to apply here. There's a lot of different types of Gymnopilus. Not all of them are psychedelic. Some are toxic. So it's not a beginner's mushroom, but it does grow all over Atlanta. And if you join our church, we teach people how to identify them safely, so you know that you're not going to pick something deadly, and so that you can practice your religion wherever you end up finding calm. So a friend calls these V-bombs. If you take those mushrooms, this is what it might look like when you're foraging. But so this is just reflected, but this is a Volvariella bombacina. It has a sac right here and a hairy cup. This is the mushroom people that come from Asia to San Francisco think they're foraging. This one's growing on a tree stump. That looks really cool because I reflected it. But the deadly amanitas that look similar grow on the ground. So if anyone just noticed that, they wouldn't have a problem. But this one is a delicious mushroom. Also has like an eggy, like kind of like umami, savory taste. So that's the importance of not just what the mushroom looks like, but where it's growing. That's why if you find some mushrooms and you just throw them on your counter and take a photo, if I saw that it was growing on a stump, I would be a lot more comfortable than if you just like threw it right out there and I'm like, where did that come from? So it helps to see all of that. So now at this point, if you have any questions, this again is a link to the foraging hike on Saturday to join our organization or to learn more. But what questions do y'all have about foraging? Yes, if you just hold your camera up, it should take you to the link tree. But I'll take questions as well.
So you mentioned Stone Mountain initially. What all, like besides chanterelles you see there?
Stone Mountain. Oh yeah. If you want to forage in Stone Mountain, initially you're supposed to ask the CEO, who is also the CEO of SeaWorld. I don't know that you're going to be able to ask him. But then I think they sold Stone Mountain. And it's kind of up for grabs. But there are trails all around. I don't know what the rules are right now, but I wouldn't recommend breaking any of them. But there are some pretty beautiful parts there near like the lake area. Have you been on those trails?
Some areas.
Yeah. So I think there's like some really like where they filmed what was it? Netflix show, I guess. Stranger Things. Yeah, they were definitely walking around. I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen some mushrooms right there. But yeah, if you go around that lake, that's like a nice area where there's older growth forests. But it just depends what you're looking for. And that's one thing I want to like impress upon you. If you have a mushroom you want to find, don't just go to your nearest forest and like hope and pray you find it. If you're looking for a mushroom that grows in pines and you go to hardwood forest, you're not going to find it. So if you were looking like for the sacred mushrooms, I made the mistake of going into the woods when really they're like on the side of the road, like because somebody mulched a tree right there. And so if I just read that they like to grow in mulch, I probably wouldn't have been looking in the woods. But if you're looking for chanterelles, you probably wouldn't be in a pine forest, you'd be in old growth. So like, just look up the habitat and really notice that you're not just going to, like if you had a mushroom in particular, like, oh, I want to see chicken in the woods, or I want to see this, you know, it can be easier to do that. Yeah. I will say, I think city parks, generally they don't mention the word mushroom. It's pretty vague. Yeah, I definitely encourage us to kind of change these laws. When I was in Athens, it was definitely like, don't take anything. And here, there's Georgia Mushroom Club, there's a lot of hikes, and people just forage in the parks. It seems kind of common. What other questions do you have?
Yeah, so I missed the first part, so maybe you already talked about that, what you're talking about now. Yeah, I was going to ask about the legality of like state parks versus national parks versus national forests versus national wildlife areas.
Yes. So we'll start with the smallest one. Your home. You can forage in your home if you have one. They're yeah. So there's like sometimes some honey mushrooms that come out of mine. Then there's city parks. It's very odd. Where I live, we're in Ansley Park, and basically there's a beautification committee. And I called the park and I'm like, can we do this? And they said, you know, if the committee's on board, just let them do it. They like help the parks. So, but then there's other parks that don't get that love and attention, and you know, I will say that all Atlanta city parks and then all the DeKalb city parks have their own rules. Generally, they say not to molest plants. So sometimes they say don't pick the flowers. And I mean, you could imagine there are some plants that are being regenerated. Like I found, they're planting some mountain mint and some skullcap at a park that I was at yesterday, and if I just decided to harvest all of those flowers, you know, they wouldn't keep growing. I mean, they'd probably not be as fruitful, right? So national parks, like I said, anything on Chattahoochee, you're really not supposed to take mushrooms. So in chanterelle season, you'll see people with like huge shopping bags, like you see running around there. It's hilarious. But then there's like the Chattahoochee National Forest. I believe you should be able to take a gallon a day. It's basically, if it looks like you're doing something commercially and you just have like shopping bags and shopping bags, they might have a problem with that. So generally, city parks seem to be all right. State parks, you're not supposed to forage anything at all. And generally, I think like the Appalachian Trail, you can probably forage for yourself if you're able to take what you want. And so then there's different things with like hosting hikes. Like I don't host hikes. Like in Chattahoochee National Park, they want to like request $1,400 for me to apply for a permit. Like not going to do that. So there's just if you're wanting to host hikes too, there's different rules on like how many people you can bring in. I will say, as we're talking about religious freedom, in every national park, there's a First Amendment zone where you're able to have ceremony and do whatever you want to do. So there might be something to that where you're able to kind of have some sort of group experience and then go walk in the park. But yeah, generally I'm encouraging people to look up the national park that you're in and then see who the superintendent is and see if we can influence them to like, hey, mushrooms are more like fruits and nuts than a tree. Can we potentially have a reasonable like regulation where maybe you take half a gallon or a gallon, but
These national parks different, right? Than from
yeah, and that's what I was saying. Like,
or like Stone Mountain, sorry, like the valleys.
yeah. Yeah, at first Kennesaw Mountain was like no foraging, and now it's like 3 pounds of nuts and fruits. And
The ranger was just like, I don't know.
oh,
I guess.
the rangers tell you with mushrooms or what?
Yeah, for mushrooms. Yeah.
Yeah, so typically they don't give you an issue, and I've even been on the phone with somebody that was like a head officer, and he's like, yeah, we probably shouldn't like go problem with that. If you're on WMA land or wilderness management, you're supposed to have a fishing permit or something or hunting license, and some people have been told like not to forage there, but when I called them, they're like, oh, it should be fine. So your mileage may vary on that. Yeah. Some states you can forage in state parks, like Tennessee and Washington. So literally every state, everything is different. Yeah. What other questions do you have about foraging safely?
Where's your hike next week?
That's a good question. I usually wait until Wednesday to see where it rains. Because I've done hikes where like it rained here, but not there. Usually it could be Sandy Springs, Peachtree City, or Druid Hills, or inside. So normally it's within 30 minutes from like the town.
You always post it on my Facebook.
Yeah, I'll post it in Atlanta Mushrooming on that Facebook group, and I'll post it on my thing. Yeah, so normally my hikes are between 10 to 15 people, and much more than that can be difficult. I do want to share this, if y'all want to smell this. This is a native mint. It has the same compounds, thymol, that's in thyme, and there's a lot of it growing like on that path. So if you just want to feel the square stem, give it a smell, and get to know how to recognize mints basically as you pass it around. Smells pretty good, huh? Yeah. What other questions do y'all have? I will say, so Atlanta Mushrooming, for those of you who didn't hear, there's a lot of really good Facebook groups. I mean, I don't work for Facebook or anything, and I wish it wasn't that way, but where else are you going to get 100,000 people who are experts in the field? Like, literally, I had a question, and someone who wrote the book, that was the first mushroom book I had, like, commented and like corrected. You know, it's like, that's really not going to happen anywhere else, so that does speed up the experience. Watch out for people who are just saying things. They don't know usually they're saying that it's deadly when it's not, which is good. But sometimes it's the other way, like, go ahead, eat it, like, what's like a chanterelle to be? So if you're gonna use the forums, I recommend like learning who keeps getting like 6 likes and they don't ever get any crying sad face emojis. Crying sad face is like, you messed up, or really, don't tell people that. And generally they'll always tell you to compare your mushroom with. So that's where learning the vocabulary, like the gills are recurrent, or they're free, or they're adnate. Like these words don't make sense right now. But if you're gonna want to eat a mushroom based on what someone on the internet's saying, you're gonna want to know what the words are used to describe the plant of the mushroom. So, yeah, and I give about 2 hikes a month. There's something to see every month. I'd say January to February is when there's kind of less of the mushrooms and more plants, pretty damn cold. But the cool thing about Atlanta and Georgia is like every week there's a different mushroom or a different plant growing, a different fruit becoming ripe. So there's always really something cool to connect with. Lots of flowers too. So if you're interested, I'm gonna put these books here. But these books are really helpful for beginners. Let's see. So maybe I'll put it on this table. Feel free to peruse, but these can really help get you on the right path. Alrighty. Any other questions? Yeah. So Monarda is the genus. Some people claim that Monarda could be toxic to dogs, but its bee balm is another one. So you'll see a lot of bees on that. There's beautiful red bee balm. That one's bergamot. Yeah, bergamot's another. Good tea. Yeah, yeah. It is just like thyme. Like I just ate a few pieces of it. But if you go further down, like it's like full bergamot, like out there. Generally in the wild, they're perennials, so I really recommend planting a wild mint because they'll come back every year. They're very strong. Like, oh, I want to see chicken in the woods, or I want to see this. You know, it can be easier to do that. Yeah. I will say, I think city parks, generally they don't mention the word mushroom. It's pretty vague. Yeah, I definitely encourage us to kind of change these laws. When I was in Athens, it was definitely like, don't take anything. And here, there's Georgia Mushroom Club, there's a lot of hikes, and people just forage in the parks. It seems kind of common. What other questions do you have?
Yeah, so I missed the first part, so maybe you already talked about what you're talking about now. Yeah, I was going to ask about the legality of like state parks versus national parks versus national forests versus national wildlife areas.
Yes. So we'll start with the smallest one. Your home. You can forage in your home if you have one. They're yeah. So there's like sometimes some honey mushrooms that come into mind. Then there's city parks. It's very odd. Where I live, we're in Ansley Park, and basically there's a beautification committee. And I called the park, and I'm like, can we do this? And they said, you know, if the committee's on board, just let them do it. They like help the parks. So, but then there's other parks that don't get that love and attention, and you know, I will say that all Atlanta city parks and then all the DeKalb city parks have their own rules. Generally, they say not to molest plants. So sometimes they say don't pick the flowers. And I mean, you could imagine there are some plants that are being regenerated. Like I found, they're planting some mountain mint and some skullcap at a park that I was at yesterday, and if I just decided to harvest all of those flowers, you know, they wouldn't keep growing. I mean, they'd probably not be as fruitful, right? So national parks, like I said, anything on Chattahoochee, you're really not supposed to take mushrooms. So in chanterelle season, you'll see people with like huge shopping bags, like just like running around there. It's hilarious. But then there's like the Chattahoochee National Forest. I believe you should be able to take a gallon a day. It's basically, if it looks like you're doing something commercially and you just have like shopping bags and shopping bags, they might have a problem with that. So generally, city parks seem to be all right. State parks, you're not supposed to forage anything at all. And generally, I think like the Appalachian Trail, you can probably forage for yourself if you're able to take what you want. And so then there's different things with like hosting hikes. Like I don't host hikes. Like in Chattahoochee National Park, they want to like request $1,400 for me to apply for a permit. Like not going to do that. So there's just, if you're wanting to host hikes too, there's different rules on like how many people you can bring in. I will say, as we're talking about religious freedom, in every national park, there's a First Amendment zone where you're able to have ceremony and do whatever you want to do. So there might be something to that where you're able to kind of have some sort of group experience and then go walk in the park. But yeah, generally I'm encouraging people to look up the national park that you're in and then see who the superintendent is and see if we can influence them to like, hey, mushrooms are more like fruits and nuts than a tree. Can we potentially have a reasonable like regulation where maybe you take half a gallon or a gallon, but
These national parks differ, right? Like from
yeah, and that's what I was saying. Like,
or like Stone Mountain, sorry, like the valleys.
yeah. Yeah, at first Kennesaw Mountain was like no foraging, and now it's like 3 pounds of nuts and fruits. And
the ranger was just like, I don't know.
oh, yeah.
I guess.
The rangers tell you with mushrooms or what?
Yeah, for mushrooms.
Yeah, so typically they don't give you an issue, and I've even been on the phone with somebody that was like a head officer, and he's like, yeah, we probably shouldn't like go problem with that. If you're on WMA land or wilderness management, you're supposed to have a fishing permit or something or hunting license, and some people have been told not to forage there, but when I called them, they're like, oh, it should be fine. So your mileage may vary on that. Yeah. Some states you can forage in state parks, like Tennessee and Washington. So literally every state, everything is different. Yeah. What other questions do you have about foraging safely?
Where's your hike next week?
That's a good question. I usually wait until Wednesday to see where it rains. Because I've done hikes where like it rained here, but not there. Usually it could be Sandy Springs, Peachtree City, or Druid Hills, or inside. So normally it's within 30 minutes from like the town.
You always post it on my Facebook.
Yeah, I'll post it in Atlanta Mushrooming on that Facebook group, and I'll post it on my thing. Yeah, so normally my hikes are between 10 to 15 people, and much more than that can be difficult. I do want to share this, if y'all want to smell this. This is a native mint. It has the same compounds, thymol, that's in thyme, and there's a lot of it growing like on that path. So if you just want to feel the square stem, give it a smell, and get to know how to recognize mints basically as you pass it around. That was pretty good, huh? Yeah. What other questions do y'all have? I will say, so Atlanta Mushrooming, for those of you who didn't hear, there's a lot of really good Facebook groups. I mean, I don't work for Facebook or anything, and I wish it wasn't that way, but where else are you going to get 100,000 people who are experts in the field? Like, literally, I had a question, and someone who wrote the book, that was the first mushroom book I had, they commented and corrected it. You know, it's like, that's really not going to happen anywhere else, so that does speed up the experience. Watch out for people who are just saying things. They don't know. Usually they're saying that it's deadly when it's not, which is good. But sometimes it's the other way. Like, go ahead, eat it. Like, what's like a chanterelle to be? So if you're going to use the forums, I recommend like learning who keeps getting like 6 likes and they don't ever get any crying sad face emojis. Crying sad face is like, you messed up, or really, don't tell people that. And generally they'll always tell you to compare your mushroom with. So that's where learning the vocabulary, like the gills are recurrent, or they're free, or they're adnate. Like these words don't make sense right now. But if you're going to want to eat a mushroom based on what someone on the internet's saying, you're going to want to know what the words are used to describe the plant or the mushroom. So, yeah, and I give about 2 hikes a month. There's something to see every month. I'd say January to February is when there's kind of less of the mushrooms and more plants, pretty damn cold. But the cool thing about Atlanta and Georgia is like every week there's a different mushroom or a different plant growing, a different fruit becoming ripe. So there's always really something cool to connect with. Lots of flowers too. So if you're interested, I'm gonna put these books here. But these books are really helpful for beginners. Let's see. So maybe I'll put it on this table. Feel free to peruse, but these can really help get you on the right path. Alrighty. Any other questions? So Monarda is the genus. Some people claim that Monarda could be toxic to dogs, but its bee balm is another one. So you'll see a lot of bees on that. There's beautiful red bee balm. That one's bergamot. Yeah, bergamot's another. Good tea. Yeah. Yeah, it is just like thyme. Like I just ate a few pieces of it. But if you go further down, like it's like full bergamot, like out there. Generally in the wild, they're perennials, so I really recommend planting a wild mint because they'll come back every year. They're very strong. You can kind of cut the tops off and they'll still keep growing. But don't pick every single flower. It doesn't like be seeds and like that. But yeah. Cool. Alrighty. So yeah, if you're interested in any of these, I highly recommend. This was the Sam Thayer book that it just has 36 plants. So if you really want to like know everything about edible foods, or if you just want a cursory view of like this is literally every plant that is edible that he's eaten on the East Coast and Central North America. So it's got really good info there. And then Botany Day goes by the families. So that's it for me for today. And if you want to get in contact, I'm always around. But yeah, all right, clapping. Yay. Thank you.